and me creating a job for somebody else, hiring somebody. So, you know, simplify and then look at the angle from which we come, which is, should it be income-based or should it be consumption-based and wealth-based? My gosh, get it to where the average person with an IQ of 90 can do their own taxes. It doesn't need to be this convoluted.
All good comments. Just a couple of fundamental things. The system we have today is designed to drive people into debt and to spend next year's income today so that government can get a little sales tax, et cetera. It's all designed to, you know, grow an economy, and I would suggest somewhat of a false economy. We're seeing that today. And it goes back to that, my argument about prosperity is part of our problem. The system today is set up so that we're on a hamster wheel. We're always striving for more income, and then we pay more taxes, and it doesn't allow for any savings. If you have a sales tax and you keep your income, then you're empowered. You have money in the bank. You can decide what you want to do. If your income is taxed, you are a slave, because they've taken your money already, and you lose options, you lose liberty, you lose freedom. So that does need to be flipped around. The fair tax at, I believe, 23% is what most people talk about. I think we still need some kind of IRS, because with that kind of money, you would have people cheating, but it could be greatly shrunk, and you would eliminate the 10,000 pages of IRS regulations.
Back to the Constitution. Why do so many elected officials from both political parties seem to ignore the Constitution?
All right, start out, it's inconvenient. I mean, I was having a conversation with Ken Cuccinelli yesterday about education reform, because I believe, and it's a passion of mine, that in our worst school districts, in Petersburg, I'll name them, Norfolk, where we have real problems that you either believe that the kids are incapable of achieving, and that usually probably would make you racist because they're primarily black schools, or you believe that the system is failing the children. These kids aren't failing the schools are failing the kids, so we've got to do something about it. So I'm talking to Cuccinelli, and he says, well, in my opinion, the OEI bill that you guys squeaked through this year is unconstitutional by the state constitution. And so there's the Constitution, the state constitution being inconvenient. So I said, well, then we need to find a way to do it that's not unconstitutional, because we need to do it. But it makes it harder. It makes the politicians actually have to work, number one. Number two, it is the fundamental barrier to the accrual of perpetual power. And that exactly was what it was intended to be, but they ignore it because the perpetual power that the politicians seek to gain is restricted by the very Constitution that they ignore. That's a no-brainer. And so essentially you can only get a gallon of water into a gallon jug. And the founders gave us a gallon jug, and the politicians want a 5-gallon bucket. So they got to change the vessel. And so I think it's true. It's just bumpus logic. So, but that's it. It's inconvenient, and that's the non-nefarious reason. And so if we find something that we think is important and is legitimate purview of the government, but we can't do it within the bounds of the Constitution, then we need to look at another way to do it without violating the Constitution. Cuccinelli is right. And it is a fundamental barrier to the accrual of perpetual power, and it limits the politicians creating the socialist utopia that they aspire to. That's why they ignore it.
I think the biggest reason is self-preservation for the elected official. And again, I think of my children when I think of politicians. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, that's right. So you think about, I was thinking about this yesterday. My daughter made some homemade chocolate chip cookies. And then, do you know what she asked me 50,000 times? Can I have a chocolate chip cookie? Can I have a chocolate cookie? Can I have a cookie? Can I have a cookie? Can I have a cookie? No, you can't have a cookie. No. What happened after she asked me the 50th time?
You gave in.
Just have the cookie and leave me alone. And this is what really happens in government. Those of us that are self-responsible and take care of ourselves and live our lives and don't need government intervention, we're not in the face of our politicians. We're going about our lives, living our lives. And the one that wants something is the one that's in front of the politician every day. Can I have, can I have, can I have, And that's all he or she is hearing. And that's all the emails they're getting. You know, rarely does Tom get emails about how wonderful and great he's doing, just keep up a good job. It's usually, I want this, I want that, I want this, I want that. And if that's all you hear, you have a very distorted view of reality. You think, well, everybody must want this. Or those are the people that actually decide to show up and vote on election day. The people that are happy and content or bothered, they're not showing up to vote. And politicians make those decisions frequently based on who's in their face. And they may say no 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times, but then they bring more people to the table and then they finally give in. Because they think it's going to be about self-preservation, getting reelected, and getting them out of their office. I've seen it happen over and over again. We saw it just happen with this legislation that passed through. You had the Chamber of Commerce, and you had some big counties that went in and said, we want the tax increase, 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 and everyone else was sitting at home living jobs and didn't know it was happening. Now we have a tax increase, $6 billion.
This is nothing new. I think Jamie mentioned earlier, from the time of the reformers on, society has been in tumult, trying to decide how best to govern themselves. The Marxists and the socialists and the communists, etc. I read a book, The Forgotten Man, by Amity Shales. Very good. That talks about the Depression and what led up to it and how we came out of it. But in 1944, Roosevelt proposed a second Bill of Rights, and it included every family would have a decent home, everyone would have adequate medical care, that you should have protection from the fear of economic stress, that everyone had a right to a good education. This is nothing new. The challenge is for citizens to address that problem. So I guess my point is, you put it in context, we're not all that liberal at this point in government. Go back to the 30s sometime and read about it. There was two brothers that were selling chickens in New York too cheaply, and the government took them to court for selling chickens too cheaply. We didn't mention the National Labor Relations Board. Started back then, we still have it today. It's not a new thing.
Fiscal conservatives are portrayed as mean-spirited or uncaring. What tangible steps can be taken to mitigate this perception? How can our message be delivered better and/or more effectively? Todd?
Boy, that's a challenge. It's just, it's a special individual that can articulate, I want to take this away from you and have you be content, and then vote for you. I would go back again to say, you know, we as individuals need to be very, very discerning on the nomination of the individuals that we want to support our views. That's a challenge. I really think, and you saw this in Reagan, where we had Carter and then we had Reagan, that you get the liberal viewpoint engenders a new generation of elected officials, and I think we're seeing that to some extent. So I want to encourage you to continue to seek out those individuals, because the pendulum swings back and forth, and we're just at a very liberal point right now.
Well, I think that we actually see this effectively taking place actually with Ken Cuccinelli. I don't know if you're really carefully examining the messaging coming out of Cuccinelli's campaign, but it's very purposeful in how the language he's using. Or if you watch Frank Lutz, if you've ever seen him on Fox News, he talks about the power of just the words you choose. You mean the exact same thing, but it's the word you're using to describe what it is. And I'll give you a perfect example of actually what Todd just said. He's like, how do you go to someone and say, I want to take something away from you, so I want you to vote for me? Well, what's very effective about what Ron Paul did or Rand Paul did is they wouldn't talk about taking things away from you. They talked about giving things back to you. That was what was very powerful. I'm going to give you more liberty. I'm going to give you more freedom. I'm going to take these hassles out of your life. I'm going to give you more money. And so it was the way that they messaged. The other thing that I think, just being getting down to a very practical level, is Republicans and conservatives often talk about from the perspective of business. It's always businesses, small businesses, business this, business that. And we do that for a reason, because we realize the trickle effect of having a prosperity, having businesses that are doing well, means that individuals are doing well. They have jobs, they have savings, they have money to spend. But we oftentimes talk from the perspective, and we talk from our head. We use facts and figures. And if you watch the political commercials between now and November, or if you've watched them in the past, you will see that Republican commercials, that tax pieces or whatever, are all facts. He voted for and I'm guilty of this as well. He voted for $6 billion in taxes. He did this much money. He did this many cuts. And it's all facts. And what do the Democrats show? They show a faceless man behind a wheelchair of a woman pushing her over the cliff. See, they don't go for the head, they go for the heart. Because they know that once they have your heart, they have your head. And so we need to speak to people's heart on those issues and paint that picture for them that really grabs them so they understand what it is that we're trying to say. And the last thing I'm just going to say, and this is 3 seconds, is instead of talking about businesses, talk about people, middle class. You listen to Cuccinelli and listen to how many times he uses the word middle class and talks about people.
I don't even like using the middle class line because I'm not better than anybody because I'm a member of the Virginia Senate, and nobody's better than me because they work their heads off and make a fortune. God gave us all equal power. And so but James is right. The first thing I wrote was messaging. But even to play to the middle class is to ignore the fact that fundamentally we all have the equal opportunity in a perfect America to make decisions from which we will either succeed or fail and then be responsible for the consequences of those decisions. And there's nothing wrong with failure. And most people who accomplish great things have failed repeatedly before they ever accomplish them. There's no shame in that. But what we have to do is change how we message. You've got to go for the heart. Some, I said earlier, you don't need to change what you believe in order to change what you talk about. Talk about something else that you believe. But the other thing that I wrote next to messaging is education, and that is that people need to have some fundamental literacy about how things actually work. When Todd said the statement that he said that Jamie talked about, I wrote it down. I want to take something away from you, have you content, and also have your vote. But the other thing, the parallel to that is you're taking something away from somebody else to give to someone that you're taking away. So we need to stop thinking about ourselves individually and start realizing that our decisions and our consumption and our willingness to take from government largesse has a direct impact on somebody else. Even though we borrow a lot of what we spend, we're still taking a lot of it from somebody too. And so education and messaging, and will we ever get it right? I don't know. I think it was Aristotle who said, if you give me the storytellers, I'll give you the next generation. And the left figured out a long time ago that the college professors, the teachers, Hollywood, and mass media were the storytellers. We need to create some storytellers to win this messaging fight.
Fiscal conservatives promote a BBA, balanced budget amendment. Short of this, how do we curtail government spending at the federal level? I think you want this, Todd?
I'll start with this one. You replace the elected officials that are up there. The balanced budget amendments, I see no reason to believe that would have any impact on our spending. I think that's pretty much a given. I know one of the questions that was asked at the middle resolution Tea Party vetting that was held right here was on that, on whether a candidate's promotion of the balanced budget amendment was legitimate, or was that candidate simply pandering to the people? And I think the middle resolution was actually looking for the answer that it was just pandering, that there's no realistic chance of it passing, and if it did pass, it would have no effect. The folks up in D.C. are just too far away from the citizens that care about that. So I am not a fan of that. I wouldn't waste my time promoting it.
There was no realistic chance of getting the 13th and 14th Amendment before 1865 either, And so I think Todd is exactly right in a pragmatic sense, and that is that, in the world we have, with the leaders we have in Washington, we aren't going to get it, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't keep on fighting for it. The Commonwealth of Virginia, as fiscally mismanaged as we are, manages to balance its budget every biennium because we have to and for no other reason. Because we don't have a printing press in the basement that the Fed has. And so, yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. In the world we live in, it goes back to the Medicare question. There's reality and then there's the theoretical. But I think, long after I'm dead and gone and long forgotten, the policies that we make in the State House will continue to have impacts, positive or negative, on the lives of people in Virginia. And I think you keep on fighting this fight to get the federal government there. I believe genuinely, and I know I'm being recorded and I don't care, I believe genuinely that we are facing a massive fiscal collapse by virtue of the fact that, like what I like to say, basic economics is if you give a 10-year-old $1,000 and hold up a Snickers bar, you might have a $500 Snickers bar. If you give the same 10-year-old $1 and hold up a Snickers bar, you might find a 10-year-old that doesn't want a candy bar. And if you continue to print money with nothing to back it up, sooner or later it will be devalued and will reap the whirlwind. So we got to keep fighting for that balanced budget amendment, even though in the real world right now it ain't going to happen. Because when we get up and dust ourselves off, God willing, from the debacle created by quantitative easing, are we on 6 yet? I think we're on 6. And the devaluation of American currency, we have to have some means of control to stop people before I kill again, to stop these people from doing it again. So I think you got to keep fighting for it, even though, yes, in the reality that we live in, it's going to be tough. It's a long fight.
Amen.
Yeah, I would have enjoyed answering that panel question for the LG candidates, because I supported a balanced budget amendment and when I ran for U.S. Senate. And I did for the very reason I spoke earlier, which is, I mean, do the left give up when they don't get what they want? When they can't redefine marriage or whatever it is? But what about the positive things? With the civil rights movement, did they just give up when they didn't get what they needed the first time, when they didn't achieve the goals that were worthy and needed to be achieved way before they came on site? So I think that what we have seen is that persistence pays off in government. And as you grow your numbers of people that support you, and you grow the demand, that you have greater chance of being successful. This is our problem, I think, on the conservative movement, is that if we lose the battle the first time, we go, well, that didn't work, let's try something else. When we try something that didn't work, we try something else. I think we need to stick with what we know is right, and push it, and educate, and grow our numbers, and have a balanced budget. We have it in, how many states? It's 48, I think. 48 states with a balanced budget. Colorado had a taxpayer bill of rights, which meant you couldn't raise taxes without getting permission. And I think those are the things that we need in Washington, D.C. And on just a very simple level, when I ran for U.S. Senate, I ran on saying something very simple, which was the My 2 Cents plan, which said, let's try something novel. Let's just try freezing government spending. Let's just freeze it so it doesn't grow every year automatically. It's like on autopilot. The budget's on autopilot in D.C. So let's freeze it, and then let's cut 2 pennies every year. 2 pennies, 2 cents. You go to every agency, you gotta cut 2 cents, including the Department of Defense. 2 cents every year. I think those sort of simplistic approaches people can get their brain around.
Last question. When elected officials enact legislation that is unconstitutional, what other remedies besides the courts can we as citizens exercise? Senator?
Well, it's sort of like talking about pyramids when you're standing in the middle of a bunch of pyramids. You guys are on the top of the pyramid because you care enough about what's going on in your community and your state and your nation to be here. So that don't, pardon me, but kick them out. Be active, be engaged, understand the issues, hold them to account, and if they don't do what they said they were going to do, kick them out. I mean, in fact, I would prefer you kick them out than go to the courts, which is interesting since I have a law degree, but I mean, we're so darn litigious, that we end up making everything cost more by virtue of the tendency to want to solve things through the legal system. There are certain things that are proper venue in the legal system, and about 9/10 of what's there right now isn't. But kick them out. Talk to your neighbors. I was talking to a friend today who's not nearly as political as I was about the phone record gate. I'll just throw that out there. And I said, this is more egregious than what we declared independence for. That we went to war over less. And they agreed with me, and I said, well, but what are you going to do? You need to go talk to your friends who don't come to the Tea Party meetings, and you need to say, do you realize that Senator Garrett voted for the large, which I didn't, the largest tax increase in Virginia, whatever, and get people fired up. Do you realize that this administration just authorized, without any due process of law nor probable cause that a crime had been committed, the government to access, and when they say metadata, that means all data, that means potentially the actual contents of your conversations. Anybody in here, and it ain't just Verizon, kick them out. And so the way you kick them out, because you guys are already engaged, is go get other people and then listen to the cause. And then when I said to my friend earlier about how, I'm about ready to pitchfork, but I'm too busy, and he said, well, it wouldn't matter if you went by yourself anyway, because you wouldn't do much good. So we need to have a movement to take responsibility and accountability back, because ultimately, as a citizenry, if we understand the Constitution, and you guys actually do, it's ours anyway.
I forgot the question after I was listening to everything you said. This is actually an ongoing debate within the Tea Party movement about what you do when legislation is unconstitutional. I'm looking at a friend back there. We've had this debate many times over. I think that part of the challenge, it goes back to what we were saying earlier, is that, as I'm looking at a friend back there, we can accomplish the same thing without calling it the same thing, because it's an issue of messaging that people will react, especially after the Civil War. People react to certain terminology that's used, like if you use the word nullification, antennas go up all over the room. And so I think a lot of it is the messaging and what you do. Let's just deal with the federal government, because Tom dealt with the state government to some degree. If the federal government passes legislation that is unconstitutional, I believe that the state government can say no. The Supremacy Clause says that if there's state and federal government legislation that's in conflict, that the federal government is supreme over the state legislation. That's what the Supremacy Clause is. But it assumes that the federal legislation is actually constitutional. So, if the federal legislation is unconstitutional, the Supremacy Clause would not be valid, which is what we tried to argue on the health care bill. And we have done this. We did this with voter ID. The Campaign for Liberty movement stopped the voter ID laws. We pushed back on that. We did pass the Health Care Freedom Act here in Virginia because we challenged and said the federal government that is not a constitutional legislation. So I think that the state government, this is where we reassert our 10th Amendment and say that is unconstitutional and pass legislation that, and we've seen that in North Dakota and others where they say the same thing on guns. You're not going to come in, you're not going to regulate our guns, and everywhere else. So I think that that can be done. I agree that relying on the courts is a very dangerous precedent that has had significant negative impacts on our country, because in the founders' vision was that the Supreme Court, the courts were to be the weakest branch of government. Right. And right now it is the strongest branch of government, and it's been tyrannical.
What do you do with an elected official that supports unconstitutional laws, other than the courts? You replace them. In 2009, I had the opportunity to speak at the Tea Party speech down at Canal Plaza. And there I gave you the solution. So you can write this down if you'd like. This cures your problems. We need to find, nominate, and elect individuals that believe as we believe. That is the cure. Now that takes a lot of work. And I want to remind everyone here that it's activists like myself. I'm not an elected official. I'm not running for anything. But it's people like me that support Tom Garrett, Jamie Radtke, Ken Cuccinelli. It's those of us out here that are fans of elected officials that share with our neighbors and our friends, and we email, and that's what makes a candidate. They start off, with the goods, the raw material. What do I like about Ken Cuccinelli? He wants a government that will fit within the Constitution. Is that a good phrase? Can we live with that? Absolutely. So I think we're on our last question. But again, I want to thank you all for coming out, and stay engaged.
I just wanted to say it was great to be here, because I know we're not getting closing remarks. I've known both these men for a really long time. I went to church with the Vander Pols, and Jill drove me around during my campaign, even through cancer and everything, and we've known each other for a long time. I've known Tom for over 10 years, and these are great conservative fighters on behalf of your cause, either as citizen advocates or as legislators, so you should be very pleased to know them, that they're fighting on your behalf.
Let me start by thanking the panelists and thanking Robin Lawson, who came all the way from West Point. Robin did a marvelous job. These panelists are three human beings with families, their own homes to take care of, their own businesses, their own employment. It's a testament to their selfless nature. When I contacted them some months back and asked if they would be so kind to serve on this panel, I think we owe them one really big round of applause. You know, when you get into the weeds, there's a tendency sometimes to complicate a position that you might advocate. You could do it a lot easier if you stick to some basic, simple facts. Now, I have some progressive friends, and I've debated with them the evidence of a conservative governing philosophy versus a progressive governing philosophy, both in terms of economics and on the good of society as a whole. Since 1965, and carry this with you as you leave this evening, since 1965, when Lyndon Johnson and Congress passed the Great Society programs, the United States has spent, oddly, coincidentally, I might add, about $16 trillion on these Great Society programs since 1965, about $16 trillion. Oddly equals the debt that we have today. Now, if 50 years, you know, academia, intellectuals in academia, they always adhere to scientific evidence, except when it comes to government. It's odd. You know, they will always fall back on scientific evidence until it comes to government. And then they completely abandon the body of thought that governs just about every other thought that they have. So as I have said to my progressive friends, you would think after 50 years and $16 trillion, Detroit, Los Angeles, Baltimore, Washington, LA, Philadelphia, San Antonio, I mean, you name just about any major urban center in this country, and the majority of them are literal fiscal and social basket cases. So the evidence after 50 years